Hello everyone, this is Steve Christiansen and welcome to Restoring Liberty. This is episode number 4 being recorded on January the 21st, 2021. We have a lot of material to cover today. Sit back and enjoy. There will even be one section where you'll want to fasten your seatbelt because we're going to go fairly quickly. What I'm going to touch on this week, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the inauguration that happened this week. We now have a new president, Joe Biden. We'll also touch a bit on the impeachment process. We're about halfway through that. And then finally, we'll wrap up and probably spend the majority of our time digging into some of the executive orders that he has already issued, and also talk about some of the proposed legislation that he is discussing. So that's where we're going. Let's go ahead and begin. With regard to the inauguration, of course, it happened this week. It's constitutional, and in fact, as I have done before, just going to look in the Constitution here very quickly to Amendment number 20 in the Constitution. And just read where it says, where it talks about the inauguration itself. Says Section 1 of Amendment 20, the terms of the President and Vice President shall end at noon on the 20th day of January. So that's where we get our reference to January 20th, and it's always on the same day every 4 years. Again, it's constitutional. I just want to make a couple of comments about the inauguration this week. Quite frankly, as I watched portions of it, and as I was looking at the mall that stretches out from the Capitol to the Washington Monument, to the Lincoln Monument, and so forth, as you probably noticed yourself, that mall was filled with flags, not people. I know that they gave an explanation for why there were so many flags out there. I forget, I think it was maybe 200,000 flags or 400,000 flags. There were a lot of flags out on the mall, but very, very few people. The few that were there, appropriately distanced, of course, and masked. Quite frankly, I think there were probably more military people in that city than there were people attending the inauguration. I'm not exactly sure what the reason was for trying to discourage people from attending, or maybe they didn't discourage people from attending. But nonetheless, we now have a new president. He has been sworn in. He's taken the oath of office. And what I'd like to do now is read again from the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8, that is the oath of office that he took. I think it's important to understand this oath of office because we as the people who have elected him, allegedly, presumably, and our form of government, we require that those who occupy positions of responsibility take an oath of office, and it's up to us to make sure that they live up to that oath of office. So let me go ahead and read that. The last paragraph in section 1 of Article 2 says, before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. Quote, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Those are his primary responsibilities, to faithfully execute his office as president to the best of his ability, and to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. I think that we, the people, need to make sure that he does precisely that. Later in this program, as I said, we're going to be referring to some of the executive orders that he's already issued and see if, in your opinion, I have my own opinions, if those types of executive orders that he is issuing are consistent with principles of the Constitution and our founding principles. Some of those being, of course, limited government, personal responsibility, morality, and so forth. I have quotes from founding fathers that I won't get to in this episode, but you could look them up and you'll find plenty of quotes that refer to the importance that our founding fathers placed on a government that was limited, that emphasized the need for personal responsibility, and obviously they said on several occasions that our Constitution is intended for a moral and religious people. So I think we just need to hold our new president to that. The last thing that I would say with regard to the inauguration is now that we have a new president, I think it's really important for us to pray for him and for his success and his administration. I have already begun doing that, and I invite and encourage you to do the same. He needs the blessings of heaven in order to accomplish what is now his to be done, and we must pray that he do it constitutionally. I have my concerns, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. All right, let's talk now about the impeachment process that's still ongoing with regard to now former President Donald Trump. As we talked in the last episode, there was an article of impeachment drafted, and then on January the 13th, Nancy Pelosi signed that article of impeachment after the impeachment proceedings concluded and enough votes were cast to impeach President or former President Trump. It appears now the timeline will be pretty much as I will explain. It appears that either on Monday or Tuesday of this next week, January the 25th or 26th, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, will deliver the article of impeachment to the Senate, to the new Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer has just indicated that the conviction portion of the impeachment process will begin on February the 8th. Now, I must say that's pretty speedy. Basically, what that means is the article of impeachment arrives. If I understand the timeline appropriately, President Trump or former President Trump's legal team will have 1 week to respond in writing and basically lay out their case to that charge. And then the trial itself will begin 1 week later. I'm concerned about that timeline, quite honestly. As I will refer to in just a minute, there have been 3 former presidents, Donald Trump being one of them, that have been impeached. They have all been acquitted. However, if you look at the timing between the impeachment and the acquittal, there was a lot more time given to those former presidents, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, to prepare their case and to begin to, of course, argue the case before the Senate. So I believe this timeline is really quick, and I'm concerned that it may not give President Trump or former President Trump due process. This question of due process was discussed in our last episode. During the impeachment portion of this proceeding in the House, President Trump was not given the opportunity to present evidence, to bring forward witnesses, to cross-examine witnesses, and the proceedings itself lasted maybe 2 or 3 hours at most. I firmly believe that he was denied due process in that first step of the overall process. And now that this trial is going to happen so quickly, it's going to begin so quickly, I'm equally concerned that his due process rights are being infringed. Let me read again from the Constitution, Article 1, Section 3. Article 1, of course, is the article associated with the legislature, the legislative powers. Article 1, Section 3, I'm just going to read a little bit here again about the trial that is going to take place, again, as I said, beginning on February the 8th. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they, meaning members of the Senate, shall be on oath or affirmation. In other words, they'll be under oath. Everything that is said will be recorded, and they will have a legal responsibility to ensure that everything that they do say is appropriate and legal. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. So the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, will preside. And no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. So 2/3 of the 100 or 67 senators must agree to convict President or former President Trump of the charge that has been placed against him, that he incited insurrection against the United States. Going on to the next paragraph, it says, judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. So basically, they can remove him from office, which you have to ask yourself, he's already gone. Why in the world are they still pursuing this? I think that's one legal question that's going to have to be answered. I wouldn't be surprised if former President Trump's legal team makes a motion to dismiss the impeachment that has already taken place in the House. And I think that they may make other motions as well. One specifically, the fact that he is no longer in office. The reference that I just read from the Constitution also indicates that not only can one being impeached and tried be removed from office, but they can also be barred from holding a position in the federal government of responsibility. Personally, I think that's exactly what the Democrats are after here. I firmly believe that President Trump was the candidate that was elected, that received that should have received the greatest number of electoral votes. I do believe that there was significant fraud, as you know, based on listening to my past episodes. And I think, quite honestly, that the Democrats are extraordinarily concerned about this man by the name of Donald Trump. He has an incredible following in this country. Is he a perfect man? No, far from it. No, far from it. But I think the Democrats are concerned, and they're going to do everything in their power to try and prevent him from running for the office of president again. By the way, I should add, there is a theory out there that that Donald Trump should run for Congress in 2022 and then run for Speaker of the House, convene an impeachment proceeding himself, and impeach the president. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do, but the first part of that theory makes sense to me. Just for him to be in a position of responsibility in Congress, and then run for President of the United States in 2024. We'll have to see how the future unfolds. As I said, there have been 3 presidents that have been impeached, and none of them have been convicted. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, who replaced Abraham Lincoln when he was assassinated, he was both impeached and acquitted in 1868. Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States, was impeached in 1998 and then acquitted in 1999. And then, of course, Donald Trump, the 45th President, was impeached for the first time in December of 2019 and acquitted in February of 2020, and then impeached again, as we know, just a couple of weeks ago in January of 2021. That first impeachment of Donald Trump, one of the charges, the second charge was obstruction of justice. But the first charge had to do with him pressuring Ukrainian government officials, the Ukraine government, to investigate his rival, Joe Biden. Everyone was up in arms when they listened to a recording of that phone conversation. What most people don't understand is that this impeachment process took place in December of 2019. It was also in December of 2019 when the Hunter Biden hard disk was obtained and provided to the Department of Justice. On that hard disk, there was so much evidence, incredibly damning evidence, of not only Hunter Biden's involvement with a number of governments around the world and receiving over the last 30 years millions and millions of dollars, not just for himself, but for the Biden family, including Joe. That hard disk was obtained, as I said, in December of 2019 and delivered to the Department of Justice. They sat on it. They sat on it until about October of 2020, just before the election. And only then did it come to light because President Trump's legal team, who knew that they had it, forced them to relinquish it and study its contents. And only then did those contents become available to the general public, even though mainstream media silenced that information. The reason I'm introducing this information is because the charge against President Trump in that first impeachment had to do with President Trump allegedly pressuring the Ukrainian government to investigate his rival. Now we know why he was pressuring them, because he had access to that hard disk and everything that was on that hard disk that demonstrated that Hunter Biden was indeed had a sweet deal, if you will, with the Ukrainian government and receiving millions of dollars from that government to benefit the Biden family, including Joe. There was legitimate reason for President Trump to press the Ukrainian government to investigate his rival. There was evidence on the hard disk that most people don't understand. Fortunately, he was acquitted, but never should have been impeached. We have a fourth president who was never impeached, but was threatened with impeachment. Richard Nixon, of course, because of the Watergate situation. He chose to resign in 1974 after the articles of impeachment passed favorably out of the House Judiciary Committee. He could see the writing on the walls, and he chose to resign rather than be impeached and undergo a conviction process. So that's a little bit of history. Anyway, I hope you find that interesting. We'll see what happens now with the conviction process for Donald J. Trump for the second conviction. Again, as I have mentioned in previous episodes, I personally and firmly believe that he should not have been impeached, nor the first time, nor the second time, because the charge in the second impeachment was that he incited insurrection against the United States. Increasing information is becoming public, suggesting and indicating, first from a timeline standpoint, that the beginnings of the incursion into the U.S. Capitol occurred 20 to 30 minutes before Donald Trump finished his speech, that allegedly incited the people to go to the Capitol, break in, and wreak havoc and violence. He hadn't even finished his speech when the incursion into the Capitol began. And then additional information is beginning to come to light, indicating who it was that perpetrated that initial violence in the Capitol. And I'm not going to go into more details now. We'll let the investigation continue. But I think I would simply say that the primary actors who broke into the Capitol and began to cause the violence and destruction were not who Nancy Pelosi said that they were, at least based on the latest evidence that's coming to light. Okay, very good. That's the topic of impeachment. So we've now talked about inauguration and impeachment. I'm going to throw just a quick little topic in right now that talks about pardons and commutations. The President of the United States in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. Let me go there now. Has the power to pardon or commute sentences. Commute means basically to end, to bring to an end. In Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, it says that the President shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. The President cannot pardon a former president's impeachment. Presumably, he couldn't pardon his own potential impeachment as well. I did just a little bit of checking to see how many pardons and commutations did President Trump perform during his 4 years as president. 237. How many pardons and commutations did President Obama perform during his 8 years of president? 1,927. I heard in mainstream media that President Trump was out of control with regard to pardons and commutations. If he was out of control, then Obama was completely out of control. I'll just leave it at that. All right, what I'd like to do now is spend the rest of our time together talking about executive actions, executive orders, potential legislation that Joe Biden is beginning to sign or suggest. Excuse me. I'd like first, however, to make another quick reference to the Constitution. I like referring to the Constitution because I think it's beneficial to understand really what are the appropriate duties and responsibilities of our national government, authorities. If we look at Article 2, Section 3, Article 2, Section 3 in the Constitution, let me just look at my reference again. All right. The responsibility of the President of the United States with regard to laws has nothing to do with making laws. It has everything to do with administering or executing laws or implementing laws. Here it says, he shall take care that the laws that exist and have been passed be faithfully executed. That is the President of the United States' responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the President of the United States to make laws, but simply to execute and implement laws. And I have a comment to make about that, but before I do, let me now refer to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Article 1, again, refers to the powers and authorities and duties of the legislative branch, Congress. Article 1, Section 8. So the responsibility of the legislative branch or of Congress is to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. So it is the legislative branch that has the power to make laws. The executive branch, the President, has the power to execute or implement laws. The reason I'm bringing that up and making specific reference to the Constitution is because over the last several years, and probably even decades, there has been an increasing tendency on the part of presidents to issue executive orders. Some executive orders, in my opinion, are appropriate based on their responsibility to execute law. If the law exists on the books, but the way that law is to be executed hasn't been fully defined, the President of the United States has the responsibility to issue executive orders to define that execution. However, too many, in my opinion, executive orders are making laws. We are going to touch briefly on about 20 to 30 executive orders that, or executive actions, some in the form of memorandums, others in the form of actual orders, that President Biden has been issuing. And I'll ask you as we do this to think in your mind, is he making laws or is he clarifying and executing laws? I think it's a critical question to be asked. All right, so let's start down this path if we can. As I said, we're going to review as many of the executive orders, actions, memorandums that and potential legislation that President Biden has either signed or is suggesting that he will sign. Okay, the first one. President Biden has signed an executive action reversing President Trump's regulatory approval process. The process that President Trump approved and used was a process that helped us to eliminate unnecessary regulation. It's hard to know exactly how many regulations were eliminated. I found one list of over 270 regulations that were eliminated by Trump. I'm sure the number is much, much larger than that. When he ran during his campaign back in 2016, he promised a significant reduction in regulation so that the power of government would be reduced. Now, President Biden has indicated through executive action that he will no longer be using that kind of regulatory approval process. The next one. This one is troubling and should be troubling to every citizen in the United States, especially those citizens that live along the southern border. President Biden has signed an executive order, or more than one actually, where he has said, number one, that he's going to stop funding the construction of the wall along the southern border. As of October of last year, there were 738 miles of border wall that had been funded, 386 miles completed. Now, this was in October. My understanding is that by the end of the year, that number was about 400 to 450 miles completed. Again, in October, there were 195 miles under construction. Some of those miles under construction have since been completed, but President Biden has now said he's going to stop construction of the wall. Let me tell you some of the things that have happened as a result of installing a secure, well-constructed wall along our southern border, or at least along some segments of our southern border. And I'm going to refer to three different sections of that wall. In San Diego, the actual city of San Diego, a place where many have historically crossed the border from the south into the United States. In a 1-mile section of the wall in San Diego, the simple fact that the wall was installed allowed a reduction of 150 border agents every 24 hours. In other words, because there wasn't a wall previously, it required 150 border agents to try and keep up on all of the activity of people trying to enter this country illegally. By installing the wall, that 1-mile section, 150 border agents were no longer needed. A return on investment of $28 million per year. In addition to that, since the wall was installed along that same section, the seizure of illegal drugs is way up in 2020 compared to 2019. What that demonstrates is that the wall itself is forcing criminals into routes that they're unused to, unfamiliar with, and where they can more easily be captured. So the wall in the city of San Diego, or near the city of San Diego, has already generated a huge benefit, both financial and from a drug trafficking standpoint. Next, Yuma, Arizona, another place where quite a number of illegal aliens have crossed from the south into the United States in the past. Because of the wall that was installed, illegal entries declined 87% in 2020 compared to 2019. That is a huge reduction. Additionally, if we look specifically at family unit entries, those declined, now listen to these numbers, from 51,000, almost 52,000 in 2019 to less than 3,000 in 2020, a 95% reduction. And in that same general section of Yuma, Arizona, in the Sanchez Canal area, illegal entries have dropped by 1,000 per month. Now you tell me, do walls help? Yes, walls help. Those people who work there and who know the effort that is required to protect our southern border are the first to tell us these walls are working. In the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, there has also been a 79% reduction in illegal crossings since the new wall has been installed. Unfortunately, President Biden is going to cease construction of the walls, defund the walls, and the people south of our border know that. In fact, in the news just this week, there was a caravan, a large caravan of thousands of people from Central America working their way north. I believe they were in Guatemala when the Guatemalan police stopped them and dispersed them. However, that's just one example of the kinds of caravans that are likely to form and try to make their way north to the United States. Mexico, our neighbor to the south, is planning to stop holding people in their country. There was quite an arrangement agreed to between President Trump's administration and the Mexican government that Mexico would cease to allow people to cross the border, or at least they would do their best, particularly those seeking asylum in the United States, which typically were people not necessarily seeking asylum, but rather just wanting and seeking citizenship. Very good. Another aspect of this immigration problem that is only going to swell with President Biden in office, President Biden has signed an executive action that has indicated that Trump's immigration enforcement in the United States will be backed off, and that President Biden's administration will once again begin to allow the establishment of sanctuary cities. What's a sanctuary city? It is a city that has agreed to ignore federal immigration law and law enforcement and basically allow anyone to come into that city illegally and set up camp, if you will. President Biden is allowing that to happen. In addition to that, President Biden has signed an action stopping Trump's restriction on Muslim immigration from 7 countries. Another action that has been signed will require non-citizens, listen to this one, this action will require that the census count and include non-citizens in the census and for purposes of reapportionment of congressional districts. In other words, what Biden is saying by signing that action is that congressmen, congresswomen, basically represent non-citizens. They don't. Nor should non-citizens be included in the census, because wherever there are large pockets of non-citizens, there are more congressmen that are assigned or elected to those from those areas, and typically those areas tend to be Democratic-leaning, left-leaning. So that's another cause for concern. Another action that was signed by President Biden, he will support DACA and, listen to this, a pathway to citizenship for all illegal aliens in the country at this time. And those estimates range from 11 million to 25 million illegal aliens in the United States at this time. And President Biden has suggested that within 8 years, those 11 to 25 million illegal aliens can become citizens of the United States, most of which will likely vote Democratic. And as you can see, they are doing everything in their power to shore up their base and ensure their possibility of continually electing a Democrat to the president, to the office of president. Are you concerned? I am. And if you're not, you should be. All right, next. Another executive action that has been implemented by President Biden ceases President Trump's 1776 commission and reinforces racial equity requirements. What in the world does that mean? You may be aware that there is a project called the 1619 Project. The authors of that project, I believe it's New York Times related, the authors of that project basically are making the argument that everything associated with the United States of America can be traced back to the arrival of the first slaves into the United States. And by the way, it didn't happen in 1619. It happened about 20 or 30 years later. But what they're saying is that everything that has happened in the United States of America from the very beginning, from the earliest days, can be traced back not only to the arrival of the first slaves, but to the issue of slavery and racial inequality in this country. And everything that the 1619 Project is seeking to do is to discredit the United States of America among our peers in the world and to cast a shadow over this great country of ours and all of the good that has happened. When President Trump found out about the 1619 Project, he commissioned the 1776 Project to reverse that and to begin to highlight much of the good that this nation has done since our beginning. And quite honestly, even though we're not a perfect nation, we lead the world. What nation, by the way, and I'll ask a few questions, what nation has an ideal, this lofty ideal of all men are created equal? Quite frankly, our founding fathers thought big. They were big thinkers. And to include that kind of a phrase in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, is a demonstration of their commitment to this lofty ideal. But it didn't stop there. We emancipated the slaves June 1st, 1863, after the Civil War with the Emancipation Proclamation, and then formally on December the 6th, 1865, with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. So, more progress. Black males were given the right to vote on February the 3rd, 1870, shortly after the emancipation, as a result of the 15th Amendment. Women were given the right to vote on August the 18th of 1920 as a result of the 19th Amendment. Segregation and discrimination on the basis of race was eliminated structurally and in law as a result of the Civil Rights Act that took effect on July the 2nd of 1964. There have also been many other equality-enhancing measures that have been implemented here in the United States of America. No, we're not a perfect nation, but we started with a lofty ideal and we have been making consistent progress toward that ideal. And I firmly believe that we are a nation committed to continue to make progress. Unfortunately, there are those who would like us to start over, to essentially demolish the constitutional form of government that we have and start new with a more socialist, Marxist, communist form of government. That will not, in any way, shape, or form, cause us to move toward equality. In fact, I firmly believe that will cause us to move in the opposite direction. One comment that I would like to make, I'd like to refer for just a few minutes now to a gentleman by the name of Bob Woodson. Bob Woodson is a former civil rights activist. He's also the founder of the Woodson Center. The mission of the Woodson Center is to transform lives, schools, and troubled neighborhoods from the inside out by involving those suffering the problem, empowering local governments to identify capacities of residents and help them to achieve their potential. It places the onus on the individual, but then provides appropriate support. He, meaning Bob Woodson, authored an article that is titled, "The True Casualties of the War on Poverty Are Its Purported Beneficiaries." So let me talk about that. This war on poverty that has been fought since the mid-1960s is what he's talking about, with the implementation of the Great Society laws passed by Congress and signed into effect by Lyndon B. Johnson, were intended to help lift not only blacks but the impoverished in our country. What has actually happened is just the opposite. I'd like to quote from this article that Bob Woodson wrote, and which shares some pretty telling statistics. He said the following, and it's a little bit of a lengthy quote, so please bear with me, about 2 or 3 paragraphs. He said, "In the past, even during periods of legalized discrimination and oppression, a spirit of entrepreneurship and agency permeated the black community. Within the first 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, black Americans had accumulated a personal wealth of, listen to this, $700 million. They owned more than 40,000 businesses and more than 930,000 farms. Black commercial enclaves in Durham, North Carolina, and the Greenwood Avenue section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, were known as the Negro Wall Street. When blacks were barred from white establishments and services, they just created their own thriving alternative transit systems. When whites refused to lend money to blacks, they established more than 103 banks and savings and loans associations, and more than 1,000 inns and hotels. When whites refused to treat blacks in hospitals, they just opened their own. They established 230 hospitals and medical schools throughout the country. In contrast, within the bureaucracy of the burgeoning poverty industry, low-income people were defined as the helpless victims of an unfair and unjust society. The strategy of the liberal social engineers is to right this wrong by the redistribution of wealth, facilitated by the social services bureaucracy in the form of cash payments or equivalent benefits. The cause of a person's poverty was assumed beyond their power and ability to control, and therefore resources were given with no strings attached, and there was no assumption of the possibility of upward mobility towards self-sufficiency. The empowering notions of personal responsibility and agency were decried as blaming the victim, and with the spread of that mentality and the acceptance of a state of dependency, the rich heritage of entrepreneurship in the black community fell by the wayside. He goes on to talk about not just the impact, he goes on to talk about the impact not just on entrepreneurship, but on the black families. I'll quote one more paragraph. Until the mid-60s, the mid-1960s, in 85% of all black families, 2 parents were raising their children. Since the advent of the welfare state, more than 75% of black children today are being born to single mothers. The system included penalties for marriage and work through which benefits would be decreased or terminated. As income was detached from work, the role of fathers in the family was undermined and dismissed. In the midst of this tragic scenario, the true casualties of the war on poverty have turned out to be its purported beneficiaries. Basically, what Bob Woodson, a black man himself, is saying is that he rejects the idea of victimization and the Marxist philosophy of the oppressed and the oppressor that is purported by the 1619 Project and, as you may or may not have heard, critical race theory that is increasingly being taught in our schools. In fact, there was a National Review article published January 19th, 2021, just a few days ago. Let me read just a few sentences from that article that talks about something that is about to occur in the state of Illinois. Before talking, however, about Illinois, there is one sentence that I want to refer to from that article that talks about something occurring in California. It says, "A California elementary school is forcing third graders to deconstruct their racial identities and rank themselves by power and privilege." I don't know if you know what that means. If you don't, you need to study more about what critical race theory is all about, because it's coming. In fact, it is already here on our doorsteps, and it's being taught and has been taught in far too many schools throughout this country. Now, a couple more quotes from that article, from that National Review article, that simply reinforces this concept that critical race theory and the evils associated with that critical race theory are spreading dramatically throughout the country. And in Illinois, pay attention to what is now being proposed. On February 16 of this year, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules of the Illinois General Assembly will decide whether to officially enact a rule already approved by the Illinois State Board of Education. So the Illinois State Board of Education has already approved this rule. And now a certain committee of the Illinois General Assembly is going to determine whether to adopt that rule. Here's the rule. The new rule is called Culturally Responsive Teaching and Leading Standards. It's a doozy, says the author of the article. Should the rule be ratified on February 16, the entire Illinois teacher corps, every teacher in Illinois, will be effectively forced into political re-education and compelled to turn their classes into woke indoctrination sessions. We'll look at details, but the most extraordinary in a raft of outrageous dictates is that teachers must embrace and encourage, and this is in quotation marks, by the way, teachers must, quote, embrace and encourage progressive viewpoints and perspectives, and then, of course, teach them. Illinois is literally about to mandate that every one of its licensed teachers adopt progressive political orthodoxy and impart that ideology to students. One more quote from the article, and then we'll move on. The new Illinois standards are saying, don't allow your racism to keep you out of therapy designed to extirpate your whiteness. And if teachers don't enter such therapy voluntarily, the new standards will make it easy for schools to force them into therapeutic mitigation of their whiteness. I don't know if you get what all those words mean, but if you don't, please look up that article. National Review, published on January the 19th, 2021, that talks specifically about the experiment that is likely to begin in the state of Illinois. And all of this connects back to that executive action signed by President Biden to basically decommission President Trump's 1776 commission that was enacted to overturn the evils that are encroaching upon us because of the 1619 Project. How are you feeling about President Biden so far? All right, I'm going to talk about a few more of the executive actions that he has signed into law, if you will. He has canceled the Keystone Pipeline project that, by the way, brings not petroleum, but crude oil from the sandy deposits up in western Canada to refineries in Illinois and in Texas. He has signed an order to cause the United States to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. President Trump eliminated the United States' participation in the Paris Climate Accord because it was a completely lopsided agreement, and that agreement basically forces government into the climate game. And it's lopsided because it basically holds the United States and a few other developed countries to certain standards and does not hold countries like China, India, and others to those same or even close to those same standards. President Biden has now extended or put a pause on student loan payments until September of 2021. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point later this year that Congress passes a law that may even forgive up to $10,000 of student loan debt. If we're trying to encourage people to assume personal responsibility and we're forgiving debt, those two work in opposite. Those two are in complete opposition to each other. He has stopped the United States' withdrawal from the Chinese World Health Organization. Basically, the WHO is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chinese government, and President Biden has placed Anthony Fauci as the head of the delegation to the WHO. Let me talk for just a minute about Anthony Fauci. Do I think he's done some good? Sure he has. This COVID-19 pandemic that we have all been struggling with has tested all of us. But here are some things that Anthony Fauci specifically himself did. January 23rd, 2020, as the pandemic was beginning to be known and arrive on the shores of America, he said, quote, "America has nothing to worry about." On January the 28th, in the Situation Room, with others of President Trump's cabinet, Anthony Fauci fought desperately against President Trump's proposed moratorium on flights from China. Fortunately, Anthony Fauci's opinion was overruled, and those flights, that moratorium was enacted, basically protecting U.S. citizens from an incursion of people from China who are potentially infected with the virus that had we not stopped those flights could have caused the situation here to be even more grave. On February the 9th, a memo was written by Peter Navarro encouraging President Trump to move forward with all due haste to develop a vaccine as quickly as possible, and said, let's set a target by November of 2020. Anthony Fauci immediately got on the television and said that the vaccine couldn't be done in less than 2 years. Do you know when President Trump got the vaccine approved and began distributing? It was exactly on time. March of 2020, Anthony Fauci told 60 Minutes, people don't need to wear a mask. There's nothing about this. Those masks are not effective. In December of 2017, and this is perhaps the most concerning of all, Anthony Fauci, as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, approved that institute to begin collaborating with, and then 2 years later funding, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, why is that important? Because it was in that Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China, that COVID-19 was developed. Okay, I'm concerned about Anthony Fauci leading a delegation from the United States to the World Health Organization, but that's precisely what President Biden has asked him to do. There are 14 actions that President Biden has signed into law, executive actions, and I'm not going to go into the details of those. Here are a few more as we near the end of this episode. He has asked that the Department of the Interior study and restudy the Bears Ears and Escalante monuments here in the state of Utah. President Trump was successful in scaling back the size of those monuments. Basically, what happened was that Democrat presidents, by executive order, carved out tens of thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres in the state of Utah, and took control of those without any say by the state government. Now President Biden is saying, after President Trump scaled back on the size of those monuments, that he's going to restudy, and I wouldn't be surprised, likely expand again. President Biden has issued an order to stop drilling in the Arctic Ocean. Let's see, another one that has to do with environmental issues. He's established a working group to measure the social cost of greenhouse gases. You can see where that one's going. He has revoked a Trump order that established the importance of energy independence and economic growth. That was actually the name of the Trump executive order. He has now revoked that order, basically de-emphasizing the importance of energy independence and economic growth. Another Trump policy that President Biden has now revoked is one that President Trump implemented to emphasize domestic manufacturing and job creation. Note, President Biden revoked that policy. President Biden basically is leading us back into the global order. President Trump was extraordinarily effective at emphasizing the interests of the United States of America above all other countries in the world. Because he's the President of the United States. He's not the President of the world. Now, President Biden is introducing us back into the global order of things. The last one that I want to talk about, and I hope that you are terrified when you hear about this one, President Biden just signed an executive order that prevents discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. I'm going to quote one sentence from that executive order. It says, children, and he's referring specifically to children who identify as a different gender than their biological sex, children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports. In essence, what President Biden is saying is biological boys who want to use girls' restrooms, girls' locker rooms, and participate in girls' sports should not have to worry about being denied access to those things. If that doesn't frighten you to death, I don't know what will. Is that the President Biden that campaigned across this nation, telling us that he was this moderate Democrat? If you think about all of those executive orders that have already been signed, is this a moderate Democrat? No. This is a radical Democrat that many of us knew he would actually be, because he's beholden to the radical agenda in his party. He has a vice president in Kamala Harris that is the most liberal senator, or was the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate. It's not surprising at all that we are seeing these types of executive orders being implemented. So in summary, he is going to increase regulation. He is going to dismantle immigration policy and allow as many people to flood into this nation as possible and provide a pathway to citizenship for millions of them, in addition to including non-citizens in the census. He's going to focus on racial equity and emphasize victimization and the Marxist philosophy of oppressed and oppressor. He's going to put us back into the Paris Climate Accord. He's going to de-emphasize energy independence. He's going to re-enter the World Health Organization with dear Anthony Fauci leading the way. He's going to expand the Bears Ears and Escalante monuments here in the state of Utah. He's going to de-emphasize domestic manufacturing and job creation. And he's going to allow biological boys to enter girls' restrooms, locker rooms, and participate on girls' sports teams, and more than that. I have friends who did not vote for President Trump, Republicans who did not vote for President Trump in 2020. They were extraordinarily concerned about his personality, his style, the tone of his tweets. Quite frankly, I have my own personal concerns. I didn't like all of the tweets and his personality style and the way that he treated some people. I had similar concerns. However, I saw what was coming in Joe Biden. And I also recognized in President Donald Trump during his 4-year term all of the incredible good that he did from a conservative standpoint. And because I saw the good that he did that was constitutional, that was conservative, and I saw what was coming from Joe Biden, even though I disagreed from a stylistic standpoint with President Trump on some occasions, I voted for him. Some of my friends, Republican friends, did not. I now have a question for those Republican friends. Based on what we have seen in just less than a week from President Biden and the kind of shift, dramatic shift to the left that we are beginning to see, what do you think now about your vote? Very good. So, we've talked about the inauguration, the impeachment, and then we've spent significant time talking about what we are beginning to see from Joe Biden, not the candidate, but Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America. Let us pray for him, and let us pray for this dear country of ours that I love, and I know you love as well. We've got 4 long years ahead of us. Do not allow yourself to be silenced. Speak up, identify issues, and make them known so that we do not lose our individual freedoms and liberties in this country, as is already happening. You've got a voice, use it. I have a voice, I'm seeking to use it, and I will continue to find ways to use it as effectively as possible. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.